Okay, well, it's great to have Adrian Rosenberg back again for a second session. Must apologize for our first session. The audio-visual wasn't that great, but we've tweaked it now. Thank you, Adrian. And we have much better audio-visual now. And so, Adrian, I'm not sure where you want to start, but please fire away.
Yeah, okay, well, thanks for having me back here. And so I'll go back where I left off a couple days before that, trying to think. Like I said earlier, the whole reason I'm here was because of that guy in Texas, Gerard Raphael, who's actually a Frenchman who's been in Texas for 40 years. He actually thinks he's a Texan now, but he's a Frenchman. Interesting guy. He watches all your videos, and he's been bothering me to get a hold of you guys. And the guy has a illness. If he sees an automatic weapon, he has to buy it. There's no hope for him.
That's why he lives in Texas.
Yeah, only in Texas. So I get to play with all his weapons when I'm down there. So he's got everything that was ever made: RPDs, PKMs. We've even got a 20 mil down there we play with, and you got to come and visit there one day.
For sure, yeah.
I was in Motoko on Fire Force over there. I think I was on K car with Bill Mickey, 2 G cars, myself and Dick Paxton in one, and Danny Svoboda and Bert Keatley in the other. We packed up and flew to Milibisi. I'd never been there before. Pretty interesting part of Lake Kariba there. I think it's past Seniority Gorge, way down there where the lake opens. There was a house there that owned by a doctor or dentist, I forget, Dr. Barkley. And things were pretty hot and a lot of activity around there. So he had long abandoned his house. He had a chef there, I forget his name, but he took really good care of us. We ate like kings, as the Blue Jobs are prone to do when we can.
Yeah.
I lived in his house. And we were basically there to help the Navy boat people out on some kind of new mission they were trying. They were trying to catch Zodiacs in the middle of the Lake Kariba on their way to the Rhodesian side. So we weren't to fly at the daytime. We were just kind of to wait and not take any calls in the day. So, man, that was about a week of just hanging out in Milibisi. The doc left his speedboat there. So we got to play with the speedboat, and Bert took me out. I'd never water skied before. Said, well, you better learn in like 2 hours because there's a lot of crop fall off. So, yeah, we learned. I learned probably in about 20 minutes how to water ski. Not that great. I fell off once. Come back and get us. And so we spent about a week just playing around Milibisi. And then one night, you know what? It wasn't 2 G cars. It was me and Dick Paxton in the K car, and Bert Keatley and Danny Svoboda in the G car. That's correct. Yeah. So one night, late at night, after midnight sometime, we got a call that they'd spotted somebody crossing over the middle of the lake, and they wanted us to come up there and investigate it. So we took off. It was a real dark night. We turned our lights off, so no nav lights, nothing. We fly to the middle of the lake right over where they told us, and they said, yeah, they're right below you there. And, we couldn't see anything. There was a couple large islands there. We flew around over there for maybe 10 minutes, and the guys kept on saying, yeah, they're right below you there. And I finally saw like this little island that looked like it was moving. And I said to Mr. Paxton, hey, I think that island's moving there. And we took a closer look, and it was a Zodiac covered in trees and branches, and sure as heck it was slowly moving. So they said, yeah, you're right over it. That's it. It was hard to see, but we had found it. There was a little bit of light there. Danny Svoboda told Paxton to turn on his searchlight to light it up. And Paxton said, nah, better idea. You turn your light on and light it up. And neither one of them turned on any lights, but we flew another 2 orbits, and he got me in a good firing position. and I put about 40 rounds of 20 mil right into that island. And that's the first time I'd ever fired the 20 mil at night. And that's quite a muzzle blast coming out of that thing in the dark night. And a lot of flashes on the water. In the water, they don't seem to go off. They went right down, I believe. But the ones that hit the island and that Zodiac, those were some good explosions. I think I saw a couple of guys fall off or jump off. And then it was dark. We flew around about another 10 minutes or so. And they said, yeah, they don't see any movement there. So they sent us back to Milabisi. And we landed maybe 1 a.m., put everything away. And I never did find out what happened that night, because the next morning they called us up and we'd already blown our cover by then. So they called us up and said, yeah, you guys are going to Wankie now. I said, okay. So we packed up, flew off to Wankie and Vic Falls. All I heard about that incident was someone had found a fairly deflated Zodiac on the shoreline on the Rhodesian side in the morning. So that had to have been it. But as far as damage or what happened that night, kind of lost track of that whole incident because I moved from there to another place. And that was the end of my time in Milabisi. I've wondered forever and ever what happened that night, but we went to another part of the war, and then time drifted off, and I forgot all about it. But
yeah,
just going through my logbooks again, I came across that incident, and just brought back some memories on that night. Yeah, so that was a long time ago, and only flew one time at night. I only fired the K call one time at night.
Okay.
And that was quite an experience. So we leave there, we head up to Vic Falls and Wankie, Vic Falls. We were based at I think we were staying on the golf course there by the hotel. There was a place called the Chondu Loop, which is down the river somewhere. Somebody came up, one of the OPs came up and said there was a 12.7 across the river, and they wanted us to go find it. And I think I told you the time before, looking for 12.7s with Mr. Taylor and sandbags on the floor of the helicopter, that he made us put all those sandbags down there, flying around looking for a 12.7 millimeter. I thought was not a real good idea. So they told Mr. Paxton, hey, go find that 12.7. And he said, well, we'll go take a look. So he said, we're not flying up as cannon fodder. We're going to go down the river. So we flew down the river to a place called Chondu Loop. That's where they said they saw it. And he said, we're going to fly down at about 100 feet. I want you to put the cannon on the floor, facing up. And when I tell you, double tap it and send some rounds across the river, we're going to use it as a mortar. I've never tried that. I said, okay. He always did what he thought was best, and I always trusted that guy. So we're flying down the river at about 100 or 120 feet or something. He banks it over at about a 45-degree angle, pushes full paddle to keep it going straight. And I was just tapping rounds over the river like a mortar. Couldn't see where they were landing. And he said, let's do that again. We did it one more run. And he said, well, that should keep their heads down and have them think about it. And then we flew low level back to Vic Falls. The next day, we went on a Salute Scouts had picked up some troops, some tracks somewhere. And I remember those guys tracking around there somewhere from the air. We were hovering over the spore, and the scouts would pick it up from the air from about 15 feet. And they could tell right where the guys were going. So we did like 3 or 4 miles tracking from the air. Eventually we caught up with the group. It was a small contact, just I think only 2 killed. So that was interesting, tracking from the air, how good those guys were. I think the next day we fly up to Mana Pools, maybe it was. We load a drum of fuel into the aircraft, no troops on board. I asked him, hey, where are we going? He said, as usual, you don't need to know where you're going. Told him, yeah, I need to know where we're going so that I know which way to walk back. I've already been through this with you. He says, okay, this time I'll tell you where we're going. We went into Zambia someplace north of Lusaka. And he said, well, if we come down, go north, because that'll put you in the Congo. If you go south, you're going to Lusaka. And the guys in the Congo will probably be happy to see you. But nothing happened. We flew there. We picked up one Salu scout guy on his own, picked him up and flew him back. And that was just a trip into Lusaka, into Zambia, but at least I know which way to go now. After that, he started sharing with me a little more. Actually, one thing that happened a few months earlier was somewhere a couple of months earlier, and how I always thought communication is a really good thing between the crews. He never really told me what we were doing or where we were going. And I like I said, I was always just along for the ride. But this one particular incident, he told me, oh yeah, we're going to go pick some guys up and give them a ride across a river. And I said, okay. And I wish he'd filled me in a little bit more on the mission, because it could have gone really wrong. We landed, it was on the Pungwe River. Yeah, it was on the side of the Pungwe River, was in a full flood. So I guess some guys were trying to get from one side of the river to the other, but they couldn't cross it. So he said we were going to go give them a ride. And that's all he told me. So we landed on the edge of the river there, and I'm waiting. There's nobody in the LZ. Yeah, we landed on the edge of this clearing, and we're waiting, and I'm looking out to front and to the left, and out of the woods come 8 fully heavily armed tours. And that really got my attention right away, and my guns were facing towards them. And for a second, I thought, man, what the heck is this? But they all seemed pretty calm, and they weren't doing any threatening things. And they walked right up to the helicopter, 4 of them, and they climbed in. And these were some Salu Scout pseudo tours. And man, did they look exactly alike. And I wish you had told me about that, because there for a second, I thought about shooting them. Yeah. And that would have been really bad. So we picked those 4 up, popped them over the river, came back, picked the other 4 up, and popped them over the river, then flew back to Grand Reef. But, you know, sometimes informing your crew what's going on might be a good idea. Yeah, I always thought about how close that came. That would have been really bad. After that was a bit of R&R. Then we ended up in Matoko. I think I was flying with Squadron Leader Taylor, and Mr. Mickey was 3 Commando out of Matoko. We had a lot of contacts every day, and Matoko was real heavy. One day we got called to the Mudzi Tribal Trust Land. And I remember that 3 Commando, it was at that time, there was New Zealanders, the Kiwi guys, there was Aussies, there was a couple American guys. I think there was even an Eskimo amongst that group, maybe. But it was like a French Foreign Legion over there. I may be wrong on this, but I think Kaki Banako was the pilot in the Lynx. And he had spotted some trails on this hillside in the Mudzi Tribal Trust Lands that he thought looked like a real good camp. So he called it in and said, yeah, you know, this is like fresh, looks like it's well used. So we flew in there, and I think Paul Bryn was in the K car. I forget. Sometimes I didn't write down the names of the crews on the other aircraft, but these are just from memory, so that may be wrong. I think Mike Smith might have been the tech. Anyway, we dropped off all these guys. It was getting late in the afternoon, and it looked like a big lemon. Nothing happened. We landed in a clearing, and we waited for a good 2 hours. And they decided, no, this is a lemon. There's nobody here. Later in the day, like about 4:30, Pete Garnett was one of the troopers that we'd dropped off. I never knew him really well, just from a few contacts before, but he'd picked up some fresh spoor, and he followed that into a thicket, and I guess it was 3 tours that had been hiding all afternoon in there, and they were outnumbered, so they'd gone real low. But Pete walked right into them. He found the tracks. He walked right into them, and he was shot like at about 10 feet away. From what I hear, a bullet hit one of his FN mags, and shrapnel cut him on the leg, on the femoral artery, and he bled to death in about 4 minutes. There was a lot of confusion that day. Nobody really knew what was going on. They called us up airborne right away. At that time, that American guy, John Coleman, he went in to investigate what happened to Pete to try to help him. He walked into the same group, and he took one through the neck and 4 through the chest, and he went down, and his radio was shot to pieces at the same time, so he couldn't call for help. So there was 2 guys down. I forget who else was involved in that contact, but it was the regular 3 commando guys. KCOG came over the top. I think it was Paul Brin, maybe wrong. And they just peppered that area in front of where those 2 guys were down. We flew over and put in a bunch of 303 in there, and it was pretty quiet after that normal movement. I think the RLI guys just peppered that place with everything they had, and they got 3 guys in there. It was so thick we couldn't see what was behind there. But anyway, there was no more movement, and Pete was dead. He died in, like I said, 4 minutes. So we had to go get his body out. John Coleman was still alive, and it was getting dark, and there was no LZ to go get him. So squadron leader Taylor, he went in first, and coming down, used the helicopter blades pretty much like a weed whacker. Made his own hover hole down there, going down inside there, chopping branches as it's going down. Loaded John Coleman on board, airborne. The tips of the rotor blades were all broken from hitting the trees. We ended up giving John one of the blades while he was in the hospital, one of the tips. Remember signing the tip of the blade and visiting him in Andrew Fleming, and about a week later gave him the blade. But from the Mudzi Tribal Trust land, which I believe was 20 minutes from FAF 5, I forget my distance and time in those days. Like I said, half the time I didn't know where I was. Got him on a DC-3 waiting for him at FAF 5, pulled out of the Mudzi weeds onto the FAF 5, direct to New Sarum. Another helicopter standing by. I think it was like 2 or 2.5 hours from the time he shot till he was in Andrew Fleming. You know, he was lucky that he lived. 1 through the neck and 4 in the chest. He was in the hospital for a while. I actually ended up in a bed next to him. So from that, you know, that was bad for the squadron, for the commando. A few days later, there was, I don't know where we were, it was out of Grand Reef to some school, the abductions of the school kids. I think 30 kids have been abducted from some school in that area. We went over there. There was a big punch up. 16 kids were killed, 3 or 4 toes, and it was just an ugly scene. But there was a lot of school abductions in that area, and they would shoot the kids. If they couldn't get them away, they would just shoot them and kill them. And a lot of them got caught in the crossfire from the air. That was close to the end of that bush trip for me. From there, I head back to New Serum for about a week off. Let me just check my logbook. I forget something. October the 4th, I left that area. I was flying with Mr. Mantovani. Just looks like contacts, a few contacts in the day. None of them I can remember. They all blend into one after a while. And then I was back in New Serum on October the 11th. Had a week off. A little bit of work around the squadron. And then we took a G car from New Serum to a place called Gwanda. Yeah, it was a place called the Manana Mission in Gwanda. And this was myself and Ian Peacock, Doug Sinclair, and Steve Murray. So 2 G cars, and the captain there was Lionel Dyke. You remember him?
Yes.
Yes, that was his group of RAR guys. And we had no K car, so it was just 2 G cars. And Doug was in one, I was in the other. And we got there that night of the 9th. Let me correct that. We flew in there, and yeah, we didn't fly the G cars up there. They were already there from another crew. We flew in there in a Cessna 180 from New Serum. I remember that now. Cessna 180 from New Serum. And then there was another crew. They handed us over the aircraft. Doug took one, I took the other. We hadn't really got to check those aircraft out. I wasn't familiar with that particular aircraft, but in the morning, the siren went off right away. Doug got on his crew with 4 RAR guys. I got in the other G car with Captain Dyke, and this is a story that Doug tells in one of his episodes, and it's one of the instances where I say 2 guys can be on the same contact, separated by half a mile, and come up with a different story. Doug had a few things wrong on that story, which I'm going to correct. He thought that just Ian Peacock and myself were in playing K car, but actually Captain Dyke was with us that day. So the moral of the story is don't play K car with a G car. Never works. Yeah. So like I said, we had not used that aircraft. I hadn't even fired those guns. And the first thing we did was fly into a contact early in the morning. Doug dropped his guys off. There was an OP over there. I forget who it was. Probably was Salute Scouts, because I've seen some of those guys around the camp that previous night. They talked us right over the riverbed. We went over the riverbed at about 100 feet, which is really unusual to get that low in the K-car position. We came over the riverbed. I saw four guys running down the riverbed right in my sights, and they were so close I could see their faces. And I opened up on them, and I got 2 or 3 rounds came off those guns, and they jammed. I said, damn. And I recocked them, fired a few more rounds, and they jammed. And those guns were not working. I'm not too sure why, but there wasn't time to think about that. They figured out something was wrong with the guns, and they bombshelled. One of them ran out of the thicket off to the left and ran across an open valley. We followed that guy, and we climbed up a little bit to about 700 feet, and we followed him. Did you ever work with Lionel Dyke? You ever work with him? He was an interesting guy. I never seen him carry an FN with him. All he had was a Star 9mm pistol and hand grenades. That's where I saw him. So we were flying over there, and he told Ian Peacock, hey, drop me on the ground, I'll go get him. And Mr. Peacock said, no, I don't think so. So he pulled it up into a harbor, And I took my FN out, and I put like 20 rounds to this guy, and I've never tried to shoot someone with an FN from the air. And it's not that easy to hit someone with a rifle from the air. Anyway, I fired 20 rounds at him, emptied that magazine. Mr. Dyke was on the other side of me, sitting in the K-car position, facing me. And he let loose with 7 rounds from me, which 700 feet, I don't think they did much. Anyway, I put another magazine in there, and I fired another 10 rounds, and the guy went down. And Captain Dyke's next to me shooting his 9mm, and he comes over the radio. I got him. I said, no, I doubt it. That's my kill. But whoever got him, he was lying down. And we were kind of low on fuel by then. So we're going to fly back to the mission to get some fuel. We were gone from that area about 60 seconds. And I heard a single round. It came right by my ear. And when that happens, it's like that crack of a rifle breaking the speed of sound right next to your ear. I heard that sound. I said, man, that was close. And I looked over, and Captain Dyke was staring at me. That guy always had a monocle in his one eye. Monocle had fallen out of his eye, hanging by a chain or something. And he was staring at my leg. It was so hot down in those days. We weren't wearing flying overalls. I was just wearing shorts. And he was staring at my leg, and I looked down at my leg, and there was a huge hole right in the top of my knee and my femur, and a lot of blood coming out and a bunch of bones sticking out. And I screamed on the radio to Mr. Peacock that I'd been hit. Captain Dyke grabbed a medic kit that was around. I remember him trying to stop the bleeding, but my leg was still hanging out the helicopter on the step. He was leaning over me. It was just too much air, and tried to pull me in, but it was just, I couldn't move. So I lay back. I left my leg outside. I lay back on the bench. We were only about 3-4 minutes from the LZ at that time. I remember, I don't know why, but I've kind of this training, just before we landed, I sat back up, and I cleared the weapon, the Brownings. I cleared them of any rounds just out of training. And then I lay back down again. We landed in the LZ, and the blades were winding down. The next thing I know, Steve Murray and Doug Sinclair had flown back to get fuel and more troops at that time. So there was no one at the contact area at that time. We were all back at the mission. And I remember seeing Doug standing next to me. And my leg's still out the side of the helicopter. I'm lying on the back. He walks up to me, and he says, oh, here's where the bullet went in. So it was right above my ankle, about 6 inches above my ankle. He says, oh, here's where it went in. He sticks his finger in the hole. Hey, Doug. He says he can't remember that. I've asked him about that. He says, oh, I don't remember that. I remember him saying, oh, yeah, here's where the bullet went in, and sticks his finger in there. So it went in, it traveled through my lower leg. It didn't hit any of the bones in my lower leg. It went right through the joint, and it broke. It just trashed the lower femur. It broke the bottom of the femur, destroyed the joint, blew the kneecap right out. And man, that was pretty painful. I remember sitting up again, and my whole boot, we would wear those Feldschoons. My whole boot was full of blood. It's just running down my leg, and was just full of blood. And from the short flight, the blood from my knee had been swirling around. The whole inside of the window was covered in spots of blood. And I remember laying back down, and Doug Sinclair, Steve Murray, and Mr. Dyke somehow got me out of the aircraft. Yeah, then I was lying on a stretcher next to the guns. I'm thinking, man, this job sucks. A medic showed up from somewhere, I don't know where, had a look, gave me some morphine, kind of hazy from there on. I never knew this at the time, but they had to go back to the base, back to the contact. They loaded me onto a Land Rover. I never knew what happened after that. Doug said there was a guy in the army there that said he knew how to use the Brownings. So they just grabbed him, threw him in the back of the helicopter and said, "Hey, you're the door gunner for the day." But no one told him that the guns weren't working. It had an issue with the feed on both sides. They had these plastic coated links in there instead of the bare links, and they were jamming on the feed. So that guy went out flying as a door gunner on his first day. But I never knew any of that. Doug filled me in on that later. They sent a police reserve in a police fixed wing to grab me and fly me back to Serum or Bulawayo. Oh no! First they took me in an ambulance to West Nicholson Hospital, which I think was only about 10 minutes away from Gwanda, pretty close. They took me in there, patched me up a little bit, put a drip in my arm and cleaned up me as best they could, try to stop the bleeding, which was pretty heavy bleeding. They called that fixed wing aircraft to come get me. I couldn't bend my leg. I couldn't get into the aircraft. I couldn't bend my knee. It was a small Cessna 180 or something. I couldn't fit in the aircraft because I couldn't bend my leg. And there was a warrant officer that flew down with the police air reserve wing pilot. I can't remember who he was, but I do remember he was like some payroll master warrant officer from New Serum or somewhere. And I think he just wanted to get his bush trip in, so he jumped along for the ride. I forget who he was. I never saw him again after that. I told him, "Hey man, get me the helicopter and fly me to Bulawayo." And he told me, "No, they're all busy." I said, "Well, I can't fit in this plane." And I had a lot of morphine by there, so we got into it with that guy. I can't remember who he was, but I was thinking, man, after the last 8 months of combat, must have flown 20 or 30 Kazovacs in that period to a hospital. When my time comes, they won't give me a Kazovac. So they said, "No, you're going by Bulawayo." And, I was pretty much out of it by then. So there was a guy, his name was Leonard, was the ambulance driver. He goes to get the ambulance and the ambulance is broken. No ambulance. So he comes back with an open Land Rover, one of those open top Land Rovers, and they throw me in the back of this Land Rover. And that's how I got to the Bulawayo Hospital. Doug thought I'd flown back in the fixed wing because he saw the fixed wing take off. So he thought, I'd been medevaced out. And I'm pretty sure if Doug knew I was in the Land Rover, he would have come get me. But yeah, after all that flying Kazovacs around the country, my turn comes. I'm in the back of a Land Rover. I think it was about an hour and a half drive from West Nicholson to Bulawayo. It felt like maybe 4 hours. I forget how long it was. I'd lost about 4 pints of blood. They topped me off with saline solutions. And old Leonard, he was just like the local African ambulance driver. Pretty happy guy. I remember him. Still remember his name. He wasn't in a rush. We stopped at 2 stores, I remember, for smokes and cokes, and he gave me a coke. And I felt real exposed in these little African stores while I'm lying in the back of a Land Rover, people mulling around looking at me. He's in the store buying cokes. Came back, gave me a coke. And then I remembered, I don't know if you remember something called sausage on. It was
Yeah.
Yeah, like a morphine derivative.
Yeah.
That they gave us. I had 3 of those morphine. I always carried them in my top pocket for troops or if I ever needed them.
Like the syrettes.
It came in like a green plastic bottle. Inside was a syringe.
Oh, okay.
It was a morphine shot. It was called sausage on.
Yeah.
I had one of those in my top pocket still. They hadn't taken away from me. They cut my pants off with some scissors so I'm just lying there in like a hospital gown. Still had my shirt on, and I took that sausage out, that morphine, and while I was having a Coke, I gave myself a shot of sausage morphine. I think it's the same thing. I think sausage might have been the brand name.
And that saline solution was called Ringer's lactate.
Yeah, I forget what. Yeah, is that what it was?
Yeah.
So yeah, that was hanging from the top of the Land Rover thing, and so that was going in. I gave myself a shot of sausage on that. Didn't really help. We got back on the road. Next thing I know, we're at it says Bulawayo Hospital. It said Gray's Ward, Bulawayo Hospital. that was a long, painful ride.
Yeah.
I should have gone in a helicopter.
Did you have a tourniquet on?
You know, I did not. In the hospital at West Nicholson, that got the bleeding under control somehow. Luckily, no major arteries were hit.
Sure. They
did something over there to stop the bleeding. I still had my Feldskoens on, I remember that, and they were just like full of blood everywhere. I got to this in that little turnaround by Gray's Ward. A little blonde nurse shows up, one of those rolling gurneys, and she had a name tag said S.A. Ford on it. I think I sent you a picture of her.
Yes.
Did you get
okay.
Yeah.
I got that. Yeah.
That was her. She dragged me out of the back of the Land Rover with old Leonard, and they dumped me on that gurney, and Leonard gave me another Coke. Just like a typical African field day medevac.
Yeah. It's the Coke that kept you alive, brother. It's the Coke.
Oh, I think so, man.
Things go better with Coke.
Yeah, I never smoked. He kept on offering me smokes, but I never smoked, man. He had another guy with him. There was two of them. I forget who the other guy was, but they were smoking and drinking Cokes the whole way. Anyway, the back of the Land Rover onto the gurney into the hallway at the Gray's Ward. And then I was sitting on the gurney while they were getting I don't know, whatever they do, prep work for the hospital admissions. That's the last thing that's my last memory. I passed out. They said, I think my blood pressure went to like 40 PSI, whatever.
Yeah.
I was on. I checked out.
Sure.
That was November the 10th, 1977. I woke up a few days later. It was maybe, I forget, maybe the 12th or the 13th before I could remember what was going on. I'd had 2 surgeries in that hospital. I woke up, had a big steel pin sticking out of my leg and a bunch of weights off the end. And that was home for the next 6 weeks. That little nurse showed up again, and she was the nurse in that hospital, and she took good care of me, and that's another whole story in my life. That nurse.
Yeah.
We ended up going out for about 18 months after that.
Wow.
She really helped me get through that period. But I was lying in that hospital bed there. I think it was the 23rd of November. And I'm listening to the radios, and it's all about Chamoyo and Pop Dingo, and everybody's over there. And I'm lying in the hospital bed, and man, I missed out on the best raid in the war.
Yeah.
It was on I think we had one TV in the ward, but that whole episode over 2 days, I was lying in there, stuck on the bed, watching everything going on, and I should have been there. I would have been there. Doug ended up there. They moved them to Chamoyo. They moved them back to Grand Reef. Back to New Serum, and then they all went on that raid. But I missed out on Chamoyo and Dingo, and that was probably, who knows what happened to me there anyway.
Yeah.
But that took me out of the war. I was there in Bulawayo about 6 weeks. One day, a Briton-Norman Islander showed up. They loaded me up there and they flew me back to New Serum and transferred to Andrew Fleming Hospital. And then that's where I ran into John Colburn.
Yeah.
Hey, John. Yeah, then I spent a long time in Andrew Fleming. And I got charged one night for being AWOL over there, which, I was there. My good high school buddy was his 21st birthday, and his girlfriend was a nurse in the hospital. Oh, yeah, it was a funny story. Ron Reed Daly daughter, I forget what her name was, Nurse Reed Daly. She was like in charge of the ward. So right about 8 o'clock at night, after she'd done all her rounds and put everyone to bed, my friend Brian Johnson, his girlfriend, name was Beryl Seward. She was a nurse in that hospital. They came in there with a wheelchair. They took the weights off my leg, said they were taking me to X-ray. They took me to the end of the hall, and there was a guy, another school friend of mine, John Sampson. They loaded me in this panel van, and they took me off to Brian's 21st birthday party down in Mount Pleasant somewhere. And I was in the wheelchair, and Beryl and all those guys, they got me pretty damn drunk.
Yeah.
I hadn't had a drink for months. My resistance was real low. And man, I felt bad. About 1 a.m., they brought me back to the hospital. They pushed me back into the bed. And man, I felt bad. I remember grabbing a trash can from the side and throwing up in that and pushed the button for some help from the nurse. And Reed Daly came by. I think John Sampson left a note for her. Hey, nurse superior, patient gone fishing. See you later. And I mean, she was in trouble because she lost a patient. And Beryl that other nurse was in more trouble because she snuck me out. And when I pushed that button for help, they said, man, you're on your own. Yeah, so that was a miserable night till 7 a.m. in the morning, till the nurse shift changed. And I thought, well, these new nurses will help me. But at about 8 a.m., the word had got around, and a bunch of other head nurses and doctors all came screaming at me. And then the Air Force got involved, and some other Air Force medic came screaming at me. And they put me up for being AWOL. Well, whatever, But there was a guy by the name of Mike Strauss. He was in charge of the hospital at New Serum. And I'd flown him on a couple of casevacs in the past. He was a pretty decent officer. He kind of made that AWOL charge go away somehow, which I was glad he did. Anyway, about a year and a half, no, about a year and 2 months of recovery, 2 more surgeries in that time. While I was recovering, they put me on back to a radio course at the Polytech College while I was on R&R. So I got to do light duties and 6 months of school at the Polytech, completing my education on the radio course. I really had a bad limp when I came out of there. I could hardly walk any distance. And I went back for a regular checkup, and I remember the guy's name was Dr. Bhagat. He was an Indian doctor. And he took some x-rays and said, hey, man, there's a big piece of shrapnel stuck between the top of your femur that has worked its way down below the bone on the top of your fibula. That's why you can't walk. So I did a quick surgery. It wasn't bad. Maybe 2 days, he took that shrapnel out. And within a week, I was walking without a limp. Yeah.
Oh.
Then I went back. Yeah, I went back to 7th Squadron on, the book ends in November 77. March the 7th, 79, I'm back on the squadron. I'm on light duties. They won't let me go out into the bush just quite yet. So I ended up on all those flights, all the new pilots coming in for training. They would all fly maybe 20 hours or 30 hours flight training. always have a tech with them. And they would do these cross countries all around the country practicing. They always had a set of dual controls in there. So that was actually a good thing. So for about 3 or 4 months, I flew with all these new pilots, and they always let me fly. And I learned how to fly while I was in there. By the time I left there, I knew how to. I probably had maybe 100 hours time logged, and I knew how to fly. So that was actually good training for the rest of my life.
Sure.
Yeah, I flew with those guys on and off. Pat Richards, Al Middleton, Al Thorogood, guy by the name of Walker. He was a South African guy. I forget. He already was a pilot, but he had to go through the Air Force training. Arthur Walker was his name. South African guy, funny guy, nice guy. But he had to go through retraining with these guys just to learn the Rhodesian way of doing things. And he already knew how to fly, so he let me fly just about 20 hours. And he actually was an instructor pilot, I think, with the SAF. So he signed some of my logbook off because I kept a log going. Yeah, so that was the latter part of my flying on the squadron. Towards the end of my time, just before I left the Air Force, I flew with a guy by the name of Daryl Squance. He was I think he came over from 4 Squadron, but he was already a seasoned pilot. But he was tasked with flying around the country with a cameraman. So we took a cameraman and Mr. Squance, and we flew from New Serum to every hospital in the country. We started in New Serum, we went to Chipinge, Malseta, Umtali. It was just like a great tour around the whole of Rhodesia. And we take pictures of the approaches to the LZs in the hospital so that other pilots would know the best way in and the best way out. That was probably 35 hours, 40 hours of flying. And what a great experience. And he let me fly the whole trip. So I did all the approaches, all the takeoffs, all the landings, and he just sat there and let me fly. But there was one incident in there that actually probably saved my life. We did, there was a place called Koroi, which is in the Kariba area.
Yeah.
We did an approach to Koroi. And, by this time I was reading maps and I was trying to know my way around. I was trying to learn how to fly because Paxton would never tell me where the heck I was. So I figured I'd just learn how to read a map. And we came into Koroi. The frequency was 123. I have it in my logbook here. It was 123.65 was the frequency for Koroi Airport. And I remembered that somehow. It seemed to be a lot of frequencies for that part of the world. And that was kind of in the back of my mind, 123.65. I didn't think much of it at the time. We finished our trip. We landed. That was the end of that trip. A couple days later, after that trip, this is towards the end of 79. I was around the training squadron and there was a call for a medevac somewhere near Kariba. And there was no techs around. So they said, hey, you're going on a Casevac. And I said, okay. So we flew up to Kariba, and it was with a pilot named Tim Jackman. And the auxiliary, they'd taken all the auxiliary camps that they loaded up. They had all these tame gorillas. They had them all in a camp. We landed at this camp. There must have been about 200 or 300 of these guys on the fence line there, all full. They were all armed. And they had shot one of their guys in the leg by mistake. So we were going to go Casevac this guy out. I told him, hey, when you land, make sure my guns are facing this group because, man, I don't have a good feeling here. Anyway, we landed. My guns are facing those guys. And it was really an odd feeling to be around that many guys with guns while you're sitting there, just 3 or 4 of you. We load this guy on board. And I had that same Air Force medic officer, Mike Strauss, with me, the guy that got me off the AWOL charge. And we take off from this LZ out of this area. Right away, Tim Jackman, I don't know what he was thinking about. He's flying towards this tree. I screamed at him, "Watch out for that tree." And he turned to me with the cyclic flying further into the tree. And we hit the tree head on. And the branches were just right next to me. One of the branches grabbed the guns and they turned it on the pivot, and the butt hit me in the chest, almost broke my rib. But we popped out the other side of the tree and we landed on a road. And he didn't put the brakes on at the time, so we kind of almost rolled off the road into this ditch. But we landed on the road, and then we stopped. And actually, the first guy off the aircraft was the guy who was shot. He wasn't too impressed with that ride. So he was the first guy off. I look, and there's this wounded guy standing under a tree. And then we get out of the helicopter. I'm holding my rib. And Mike Strauss, his eyes are about this big. He wasn't also impressed with that ride. And we look at the aircraft, and all three rotor blades, the tips of them are just completely destroyed. And on one blade, the balance weight had come right off. And that's almost 80 grams of weight that had gone off one blade. There's no way we could fly that aircraft out of there with the tips of those blades to open up like bananas. So in the field there, I took all three tips off. They were detachable with like 20 screws on each side. You can take the tips off. So we took the tips off, and I said to him, well, let's see if we'll fly without the tips. So we got airborne. It was so out of balance because you were missing so much weight from one blade. We got airborne, and I was shaking pretty bad. The guns were moving up and down on that step about 2 or 3 inches up and down. And I said, let's get out of here. I don't want to spend the night here. We can fly. And he said, okay, we're going to Koroi, which is down the road. It's real dark now by the time we got airborne from there. Really dark. So we took off, and he's heading to Koroi, and we're lost. We can't find Koroi. And see the red light come on, low fuel. And once the red light comes on, you got 10 minutes to land. And actually, we left that wounded guy behind. He wouldn't get on with us. There was no way he was getting back on that helicopter. Some troops came by and took him. I don't know what happened to him, but he never came with us. So it was just the three of us, myself, the pilot, Tim Jackman, and Mike Strauss. And I never saw Mike after that. I'm not sure what happened to him, but he was a good guy. And we're flying around lost at night in Koroi, and we can't find any. And he's calling all frequencies. And I remember I told you I was in that area with Daryl Squance like 2 or 3 days before that. And I said to him, try 123.65. And he said, huh? I said, yeah, that's the number. Try that. So he put that number in, and he got hold of Koroi. And I don't know if you remember, on the front of all the Alouettes, they had like an H antenna that was a homing device.
Yeah.
Remember those?
Yeah.
So they said, okay, they had like I think it was called a QDM. Somehow, if you push your transmitter, they had a way to tell where we were. So he held his transmitter in for 5 seconds, and they said turn left 5 degrees. And they said, yeah. And he held it in another 5 seconds. I said, yeah, another 5 degrees. They said, okay, hold it there. You're right on track. And they say, fly straight on that heading. And man, we flew about another 6 minutes. And there we saw the lights of Koroi. And we landed on this football field. Man, we were glad to land. When we landed, we had about 2 minutes of fuel on board. And if you'd come down there at night in those trees, that wasn't going to be good. But man, I was really lucky. I remember, and we got hold of those guys, and they guided him to that. And that aircraft was trashed, and we were really lucky to have survived that flight. we went back by truck the next morning, and they sent a crew in to that helicopter back by road. And when they were taking it apart to load it on the road, one of the guys noticed that, man, the tail boom is kind of sagging. And they looked, and when we'd hit that tree, we'd broken one of the attachments. I don't. If you probably didn't know this, but the tail boom is only held onto the fuselage by 3 bolts, and they're only like 14 millimeter bolts that hold that whole tail boom to the fuselage. So we'd broken one of the mounts on the top, and during flying to Karoi, shaking so bad, we broke the other mount. So the only thing holding the tail boom to the fuselage was the drive shaft. So when we landed, tail boom drooped. And when they came to pick it up in the morning, top 2 mounts broke and it pivoted on the lower one and it hit the ground. So our tail boom was about to fall off that night. And sorry for the rough ride. Like Strauss, wherever you are. That was probably my last operational flight. After that, February 23rd came along. I went down to New Serum. They signed me out, and I left the country. I think I stayed there right after independence. I left, I think, was maybe June of 1980. I went to Florida, became an illegal alien for 6 years.
Adrian, I think we've been going for an hour and a half, so that's more than enough. Just give us a quick 1 minute. You sort of what you've been doing since then. So, I mean, helicopters have become your life now. You said, hey?
Yeah, once I left the Air Force, I went down to Florida, Vero Beach, Florida. I landed there with about maybe about $800 to my name. I bought a bicycle. I was riding around there. I met up with a Green Beret captain who was a friend of mine, and he took me in under his wing and he helped me get established. I ended up working for him for a while, and he had airplanes and helicopters, and he helped me get my pilot's license there. I had enough time to get a pilot's license because I knew how to fly. So I got my license there, and I got my mechanic's license through him. And then I just ended up working for him for quite a while. And I ended up flying in Utah, Wyoming, up in Alaska, Panama, Hawaii.
Yeah.
Probably 8,000-9,000 hours later, still flying today.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so slowing down on my flying now, but I'm doing a lot of instructing and I teach guys how to fly.
Okay.
But I think at the end of this year, I'm going to throw it in.
Are you, sorry, I won't put this in the video. Are you married? Do you have kids and stuff like that?
Yeah, I am married, and it's okay to put it in the video. My wife, Carla, she's from Idaho, great lady. We have 2 boys, and she's been, a real inspiration in helping me get through some of the struggles from those days. He recently bought me that book from Barry Zorenstein.
Yeah.
For my birthday present, made me read it. Actually, really good knowledge in his book. It really did help.
Yeah. Barry's a great guy.
Yeah, live day by day. She supports me. It did bother me, a lot of those things, and all these years later, it still bothers me some. But we get through it somehow.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you went through a lot more than I did, but I went through about 10 years of self-destructive behavior. I was doing very well in my job. I was a successful stockbroker, kind of working on Wall Street and whatever, but I used to drink like a fish and drive fast cars and I think I had so many accidents caused by alcohol. Fortunately, no one else was ever involved. But driving home drunk and driving too fast, and then eventually the insurance company refused to insure me anymore.
Yeah. I
But
mean, it's
yeah,
not easy, man, to get through that.
yeah,
I'm glad you got through it.
yeah, yeah. No, I think what saved me was the time when I was spinning out of control was I was alone and I had no army friends. And then I met up with a bunch of Rhodesian Light Infantry guys, Tim Bax and Jock Hutton from the SAS and Trevor Desfountain, and just having fellowship with other guys who were had seen much more action than myself. I mean, Jock Hutton jumped in the Normandy landings and took part in the Battle of the Bulge in World War II. So
I remember seeing his logbook. He showed me his logbook in the same that same serial number aircraft he jumped out over there. He was still jumping out of that same aircraft.
Yeah. And these guys were fine, and I thought, why do I feel sorry for myself when these guys have seen 100 times more than I have and they're fine, so I suddenly realized, well, I can also be fine. So I just kind of got over it, and just by hanging around other soldiers. And but I needed that fellowship. I needed to connect with other guys who'd been through the same thing as me, and I think that really helped me. Yeah
Good. I think the best Barry's book was Find Your Tribe, and you need to find your tribe.
yeah
And, I never really spoke about this for many years. You leave it buried in the back of your mind. It does not help.
No,
it's good to get it out.
I think it's very cathartic to get it out, and it helps other guys to listen to your stories too. I mean, even seasoned Choppertechs like Beaver Shaw, I know Beaver had his struggles as well, and talking to guys like George Bushney, and it's good to hear their stories, and it's good to, I mean, we've a lot of the names you mentioned we've had on the channel, from Steve Murray to Doug Sinclair, and so I really want to thank you, Adrian. Thank you very much for volunteering and coming forward, and I appreciate this. I will edit this and let you have first gander at what I've done.
Yeah, sure, appreciate it, and hey, it's a good job that you're doing, and it's a great show.
Thank you.
I learn a lot from people you'll never know unless they tell their story. So if guys out there, you need to tell your story before you're gone, because it's going to be over and those stories will die with you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I really appreciate that pitch, because it's a struggle. I mean, if I contact 10 guys, I mean, if you think about all the thousands of soldiers and airmen, we've interviewed about 200, if that, less than 200. So there's still many hundreds of guys out there who haven't told their stories. If I contact about 10 of them, I'm lucky if 3 of them will even reply. And of the 3, at least 2 are unwilling to talk about it. And then maybe 1 guy will make an appointment, and then the day before the appointment, he'll say, I've had second thoughts. So it's a real battle for me to get guys to talk. Why? I don't know, because, but, but then there's guys like yourself who think about it long and hard, and eventually, decide to take the bull by the horns and talk about it. And I really, really enjoyed these 2 interviews. I'm totally amazed at all the stuff you went through. It's incredible.